I remember when I was graduating college, I was like, hey, I know I want to do your job, so I'm just going to apply to jobs and foundations. He's like, why? And I had to go through that exercise of explaining like, well, I saw the work that you did. I saw what that can do. I want to just be part of that. And he's like, great, but go get good at something and then bring that to philanthropy. Don't just show up with no experience and don't just show up with no like perspectives on how different sectors interconnect or how things happen, right? Like go do something. And then that'll help you narrow, if ultimately you still want to get into philanthropy, kind of in what sector, right? Welcome to Career Cheat Code. In this podcast, you'll hear how everyday people impact the world through their careers. Learn about their journey, career hacks, and obstacles along the way. Whether you're already having the impact you want or are searching for it, this is the podcast for you. All right, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Appreciate you all taking the time to connect today and really discuss your careers. This is a very special episode in that it is a different format than most of the listeners are used to. We're having two folks here that have a relationship together and also understand kind of the world of philanthropy together, and are going to help us unpack that and talk about a career in philanthropy, what that looks like, and kind of their experiences in different sides of philanthropy and with different functions. So without further ado, let's start with some introductions. Roland, tell the world who you are and what you do for a living.
Great. Thanks, Radhy. Thanks for having me. Roland Kennedy Jr. I'm the grants director at the Carnegie Corporation of New York. So my day-to-day looks like managing three incredible people, two managers, one coordinator covering our international grant making as well as our national grant making, the Andrew Carnegie Fellows, as well as some executive funds. So for me, my role really covers the day-to-day of the grants management as well as two other unique opportunities within that, including board operations, and I get to program manage the relationship with the Carnegie Archives at Columbia University. So that's what my day-to-day looks like.
Awesome. That sounds fun. Fauzi, what's going on your end? What do you normally do on a nice Monday morning?
Yeah, great question. So Fauzi Talabi, I work for a smaller family foundation. And when I say smaller, it's more so staff size rather than endowment, but based out of Boston. And my role as a program associate is kind of wearing multiple hats. So I get the privilege of overseeing a smaller capital grants program, but then additionally, I get to learn a lot about the grants management side of the work. So I get to oversee the grants management, support other program officers in their day-to-day tasks, and then a lot of working with the community, listening, kind of corresponding with them, hearing what their needs are. It's really a great opportunity for me to kind of just learn the ins and outs of philanthropy and see where my kind of career can take me.
That's great. I always think it's interesting for folks to understand how people know each other. Can you all speak briefly to how you all know each other, and then I can chime in on how I know both of you?
Yeah, sure. I guess I can start. So when I first entered the sector, I was fortunate enough that I got an opportunity to go to a conference in Baltimore. And that conference is really a collective of grant makers and more so grant managers. So with that being my role and being so new to the space and the sector, I was kind of lost, didn't know exactly where my footing was and who my people were. And I was fortunate enough to meet Roland and another gentleman that I still speak frequently with, Stephen Casey. And they kind of took me under the wing just due to the fact that they kind of saw that I felt lost at times, didn't know exactly if this was the right career for me or the job for me. And I really needed those individuals that had been through it, knew exactly kind of how to navigate the waters, and super grateful that I found them, because at that point in time, I didn't know if I was going to make it another week, but it was really, I met them at the right time and super grateful for that.
Yeah, and Fauzi and I, since meeting some few years ago, are now formally in a mentee-mentor program through Peak Grant Making called the Arnetta Prawl mentorship program. And that has been going very well. As somebody who is in the Peak New England chapter, I think it's called, there's not a great deal of Black representation in that chapter. And so I think to have the opportunity to formally be in a mentor-mentee relationship with Fauzi has been beneficial. We are both learning through that process. And I think it's great that Peak Grant Making has created that opportunity.
That's great. And I will say, I think there's so much value in both of you joining those types of programs, right? As a mentor and as a mentee, to be able to have dialogue with folks around, maybe it's not exactly the exact role that you've had before, but you've been in philanthropy for long enough that you can kind of help instill some of that knowledge and try to help folks avoid some of the bumps that you may have had along the way, right? And then
Sure.
on the mentee relationship, right? It's how do I learn about the field? How do I hone in to understand if this is where I want to stay? Right? Is this even the type of job that I want to continue to do? Because you're building your career and you're thinking about how you want to have impact and what you bring to the table. So it's just a very, great time in your career to build that. For those that don't know, what is Peak?
Yeah, so Peak Grant Making is a national nonprofit that stands for Principles, Equity, Advocacy, and Knowledge. So it is the premier nonprofit, I think, nationally that focuses on equitable grant making practices in the philanthropy sector.
That's great. And Roland, do you want to tell the audience how you and I got connected?
Yeah, so we got connected, I believe, during your time at Rockefeller Foundation when you were on the economic mobility team. Do I have that right?
Correct.
And then formally got re-engaged through the collective, the Black Men in Philanthropy Network that has been growing for the last 3 years, which brings together brothers in the philanthropy sector from grants management, program, evaluation, learning, impact, comms, investments, finance, legal, all the above, to make sure that we all know each other and build community together.
That's great. And we just had Stephen Minix on the show from
right.
that collective as well, right? Who, I think the value of such a group, right, is this is a volunteer run. Folks like yourself and others are like spending time to understand that it is important to cultivate spaces for people in the field. And like, how do we create a space for brothers to just talk about the wins, the losses, the gripes, the stripes, all of the things, right? And how do we support each other? How do we help each other? How do we co-fund together? How do we, think about opportunities in the field together? How do we just recognize that, the history of the field is not necessarily for us, right? And, I think about that often as especially for some of us at like some of the larger foundations, like if some of these folks that left that wealth in the 1920s realize who was managing some of their money, like they'll be rolling in their graves, right? But like we create now a space to acknowledge things like that and also recognize how we can leverage the field to impact communities, right? And to be intentional about communities. And, a lot of these organizations, because of maybe that was the history, right? But the leadership there is not like that, right? And the leadership there may think very progressively about how to like support communities. So, I just really appreciate that space that has been cultivated now over the last few years and just welcoming me over the last year. Fauzi, as you said, right? Like I've been in my career for over 15 years or so, but in philanthropy for less than 3, right? So like, how do I recognize my network? How do I understand what folks like about the field and the different iterations of philanthropy, right? So many different types of foundations.
No, I was going to say, there's so many instances. So I used to work in the nonprofit space and I've been wearing multiple hats and it's kind of the same thing, but the nuance behind the work, right? And the rationale behind the work. Coming from one side, you don't really know it. And being on this other side, it's still a learning curve. And I think that having those people that have been there, done that is super important for anyone that wants to try to make it in the sector.
So for both of you, how did you get into philanthropy? And like, did you know about philanthropy as you were stepping into it?
I would say no, I did not know what philanthropy was or how to get into it. Now, like I shared, I was working in the nonprofit sector, so I should have had a little bit of an inclination on where the money was coming from. But at that point in time, I was really focused on the programmatic side of the work. My kind of story into this sector is that after the pandemic and COVID, I took a break, about a 1.5-year break, moved down to Atlanta and started working and creating a nonprofit down there. When I came back up to Boston, I was working in hospitality and just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew that it had to be mission driven. It had to be people centered, and it had to be really an opportunity for me to get back into the community and work with youth or be connected in changing some of the narrative for those that I used to work with. So I was fortunate enough that someone randomly called me while I was at the hotel, and I took the call. Usually I don't pick up a random number, but I did. Got super lucky that they saw value in my previous experiences. Just being in the direct service line of work, I think anyone that is of that kind of space and has that experience brings a lot to the table for nonprofits, but also for foundations as they're trying to kind of understand what it is that the community needs. You've lived it, you understand it, and you speak that language. A lot of times folks on the philanthropic side, they don't speak that language. So it's harder to build those connections. So that was kind of my introduction into it. And yeah, definitely not the traditional path.
Yeah, my path is not that dissimilar from Fauzi's. I was working in government. And so, as the saying goes, and it's specifically legislative government, which has been nearly 100% of my experience working in government is all legislative. And as the saying goes, if your boss loses, you have no job, or you have to go through a different process to find a new role in legislative government. If you're a member of Congress, whether that's the state legislature or federal, loses, it's not as seamless to go from one role to the next in some cases. So for me, I had to rethink what my next steps were, what my career was going to be. And thankfully, it was a friend of mine from college that sent me a job description that I didn't even have an imagination for. And I applied for it, didn't get the initial job, but got a call back similar to what Fauzi said, some 2 to 3 weeks later, and did get a role, one that I didn't even apply for. And it was a fascinating journey since, and it's been 10 years in this work across different types of organizations, from donor advised funds to living donors to now an endowment type of foundation. So it's opened my lens and my mind to different aspects of philanthropy, what's possible, some of the things that aren't as possible, the C3 side, the 501c4 side, and getting a full sense of what philanthropic capital can really do, what it's supposed to do, and really thinking in broad, big picture steps in terms of what my career in this work should be, and then how it connects to purpose. I think for me, anything that I've ever done is purpose-driven and purpose-built. I don't like to do anything just for flex. It has to be something that's service-oriented. That's what I'm used to. It's what I come from my family, from my parents and grandparents. And so, for me, philanthropy, specifically the sides of philanthropy that I care most about, which have to do with electoral democracy, economic justice, media journalism, press freedom, and education funding, whether in the U.S. or elsewhere, those are the topics that I think about and wake up thinking about, go to sleep thinking about, are those topics. So any sort of funding aspect that's focused on that, the more I've learned about where those opportunities are in the sector, the more I've connected to it. And so going from government, 1,001 years ago through today, that's been the thread and the theme throughout my career, because those are the things I know that I will bring my most authentic self to. So to me, regardless of whether it's government or philanthropy, the purpose has been the same, but I had to find that. And I didn't know that philanthropy would be one of the vehicles to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important, right? Because a lot of us are very mission driven, very purpose driven, and we sometimes just don't know the different avenues that we can channel that through, right? Like, how do we understand that? I was fortunate enough to know about philanthropy when I was 16 years old. I was in a high school in Harlem, and we were a public school with a very savvy principal that secured philanthropic funds for programming. So we had lacrosse teams, robotics, chess teams, a bunch of mentorship programs, right? And college ready programs specifically. So I saw the value in philanthropy really early on, right? I was able to really connect with someone at a foundation and understand how the levers can work, what their role meant, at least from what I could understand at age 16, right? Like, I saw the programming, I saw the end results, but understanding from like the macro and all of that, like, it took me a little while after that. I was at least fortunate enough to be exposed to philanthropy early on, but I realized a lot of paths are usually more like you two, right? Where you stumble upon it, or you realize if you're mission driven and you're doing work in nonprofit direct services or in government, you realize there are other factors at play, and you then tap into that. Would love to hear from a more functional standpoint, right? So like for me, I got my role at Rockefeller by applying on LinkedIn. I didn't know anyone there. I just applied blindly and was called back because I had experience with government and experience developing the types of programs that we were funding in my team at the time. Would love to hear kind of what you all think you brought to the table, and I want to be clear about it, because I think there are people that are trying to pivot into this space, and would love for them to hear kind of how they can position themselves to ultimately get into philanthropy.
Yeah, so I actually want to lead with something that I recently came across that another gentleman told me about. And he said, I was struggling in a sense with kind of my day to day tasks. And he said, you got to give yourself grace, right? Give yourself grace because you are new to the space or you may not know everything. And nobody knows everything, right? But you have certain values and you have certain experiences that have shaped you and are invaluable to whoever it is that you're working with and for. So I think that is kind of where I would like to believe was, or I'd like to think that was the main driving force into why I was hired. Along with I have a college degree, right? You have to have some of the baselines for most jobs, but at the same point in time, the lived experiences, the ability to communicate with others, and I think inherently, just the general ability to listen is super important in the role that I have on a day-to-day basis. So for me, I may receive anywhere from 15 to 20 info calls a day, and that's from the community externally. And they're curious about what it is that we do, how do we operate, what are the potential opportunities. And a lot of times for me, I really just sit there and listen, sit there and absorb what it is that their work is focused on. Are there any shared experiences? Are there other programs that we've kind of funded in the past that are similar? And if there aren't, if there isn't a correlation or if there isn't an opportunity, is being able to kind of redirect them in the right direction, give them additional resources to where they can find that funding, or maybe they can have an introduction call and start building that relationship. So my general ability to really just care and want to make sure that everyone else is succeeding, I think is really, really important in this role. I think that's one of my strongest suits in what I bring to the table here. And then also additionally, like I said, like I can do the basic job of grants management. I can stay and be task oriented and all of those things that are kind of required, but it's the non-shiny objects that you're going to put on your resume. It's the soft skills that I think are really important in how you can be successful in this space.
Yeah, I like what Fauzi said. I think that this sector, this industry, is somewhat still a closed door. I can actually leave out the somewhat. It's still a closed door, like a number of other industries. And I think that, the more internship opportunities, fellowship opportunities you can find as a pathway into philanthropy, the better. There aren't many that exist, especially for people that look like us. And I think what the Bowie State Philanthropy Initiative is doing is a great example of what I would love to see more of in the sector, intentionally targeting, creating more diverse opportunities, especially for Black people to enter into philanthropy, and also set the lens of possibility of not just entering philanthropy for any job, but as leaders. Like, that's a very different approach and thought process, because I don't know when I entered this work if I had an imagination for executive leadership, because that's not what I saw. President's offices have certainly diversified as well over the last 10 years, but representation for the sake of representation has also not been quite the bar that I expected it to be in philanthropy. It's a low bar, mid bar, high bar, depending on what you're looking for. So I think that I would first go back to, what are you drawn to? If you want to work in philanthropy, why? What is it that you care about? Have you targeted the type of organizations that work on the issue areas or programs that you care about? What type of role do you want? Do you want to be on the grants management side, or do you want to be a grant maker? Or do you want a mix of both? Because those roles also exist. Similar to what Fauzi does. I mean, he gets to be in both the grant making and the grants management side. That's a very unicorn type of role, but they're out there. Or do you want to do comms? Do you want to do evaluation, learning, and impact? Do you want to do investments? We need more finance and investment, diverse finance and investments people doing this work who are not named, Bob, James, or Rob. True story. I think the data is that the majority of people that do finance and investments in the philanthropy sector have one of those three names. So, there's potential to change that as well. It's a very challenging door to break down, though, or brick wall, regardless of how you look at it. So I think, it's getting clear on both of your whys. What is it that you want to do? How do you want to go about doing that? The role, to me, is the last part of that equation. It's first getting clear on the why and then figuring out what type of role that connects mostly to you that makes the most sense for you to step into, and then how to go about doing that, and talking to brothers like us, other people in the sector that can be trusted and are approachable, and who are also willing to share some of the game. Because, you know, I remind people often that this is not charitable work. You know, sure, from the IRS perspective and whatnot, yes, there are charitable rules to giving, but philanthropy is a type of business and a type of capital. And so I think the more that we emphasize that, and the, for lack of a better word, professionalism that goes into thinking about it as a career and a lifestyle, I think that changes the way that people think about approaching the sector and coming into it. So that would be, you know, my advice on how to get started with that conversation, and then lead into whatever that role looks like.
And I love that, right? Because that reminds me of something that, you know, the person that I mentioned earlier that was supporting some of the work in my high school, that person's my mentor now, right? And that person I remember when I was graduating college, I was like, hey, I know I want to do your job, so I'm just going to apply to jobs and foundations. He's like, why? And I had to go through that exercise of explaining, like, well, I saw the work that you did. I saw what that can do. I want to just be part of that. And he's like, great, but go get good at something and then bring that to philanthropy. Don't just show up with no experience, and don't just show up with no like perspectives on how different sectors interconnect or how things happen, right? Like, go do something. And then that'll help you narrow, if ultimately you still want to get into philanthropy, kind of in what sector, right? Because you can get into philanthropy and care about birds. You can get into philanthropy and care about trees, sustainability, youth work, workforce, and businesses, right? Like whatever the thing is. But I think until you kind of explore what the value is that you bring, or if it's systems, right? Whatever that looks like, you know, to go out there and ask yourself those questions first, understand kind of what, not only what you want to get out of philanthropy, but what you're bringing to philanthropy as well, so that you can continue to add value to the field and change things and become some of those folks that are then, as Roland said, right, giving out some of the game and supporting others in their journey, so that we're a little more clear, because our roles in philanthropy are very different. So when I was at the Rockefeller Foundation, my role was really to be a grant maker. So to find and partner with organizations that were doing things on the ground in different cities, supporting entrepreneurship, supporting families throughout the country. But I know that's different for your roles, right? So we'd love to also discuss that, because I think it's important for people to understand that there are different types of roles in philanthropy, and not just a program officer role, or not just whatever you see as the CEO that's doing all the interviews somewhere. So what do y'all do? What does your day-to-day look like? What are you ultimately tasked with and responsible for?
Yeah, I would say that my experience is a little bit different just due to the fact that I am part of a smaller team. So it's one of 6 staff members, and we are at a family foundation. So the root of the work that we do is really making sure that our trustees understand and are a part of the process as well of our grant making, right? That could be the evaluation and making sure they understand exactly what it is their money is doing. That can be from a programmatic lens and saying, what type of programs do you want to create within your portfolios to execute on your vision and how you wish to impact the community. And then additionally, for me, it's a little bit different because I do programmatic work, and I also do grants management work. So like I shared before, super lucky that I get to learn multiple different skill sets and wear multiple different hats on a day-to-day basis. So let's just say it's a Monday in the summertime. It's going to look a little bit different than a Monday in fall, but Monday in the summertime might be a lot more research based as it kind of slows down for us. So it would be analyzing how our programs worked this past year, specifically in my program area of smaller capital giving, figuring out what types of projects were funded. Are there any trends in regards to what people are requesting? What is the general number of people served? And are there kind of gaps in our issue areas that we're trying to address? So the other element would be during like a peak season, I would call it. There's a lot of site visits. There's a lot of grant reviews, application reviews, and then it's also from a grants management standpoint, there are other program areas that are dispersing funds. So it's creating the grants in our grants management database, right? It's making sure all the transmittal letters and all of the other technical elements of executing and actually giving money out are completed. And then it's also being ready to support any program staff as it relates to board meetings. So just the general board preparation. So again, like I said, it's wearing a lot of different hats and learning a lot of different things and skill sets. And time management is now my new best friend, because without it, you're just not going to be successful, right? But then it's also creating systems for yourself to where you can be more efficient in your work, right? Understanding kind of where you are in the year and projecting what your workload is going to be. Like that's something that I'm super passionate about right now. It's super random, right? It's not something that I would have ever thought would be really important to the work that I do. But now it's creating systems, understanding how can I get ahead, and then also learning how to hold others accountable and managing up. So that's one of my biggest goals this year, is creating those systems so I can manage up. And I think for anybody that is new in this space, that may be at a smaller foundation, or even that may be in a nonprofit and wearing multiple hats, and you may have to report up because everyone is kind of working together. Learning the kind of tools that will allow you to be effective in managing up is really paramount to your success. And it's not necessarily just because you want to get a task done, but it's teaching you how to be an effective leader down the line. So I think that those kind of day-to-day tasks are super, super important for me and my growth, but they also teach you kind of, if you want to be in a different role, they're all transferable skills that you will need to be successful in anything. It's not just philanthropy. It could be in the business space. It could be in healthcare. It could be anywhere. So
I love that answer, because my roles over the years have covered majority grants management, but also programs and comms, over the last 10 years. And I hold on to that greatly, and also don't dismiss my government experience as well, which was legislative and communications as well. And so I think all of that creates a picture into my day-to-day, because the grants management side of philanthropy is often still talked about or deemed administrative, or for lack of a better term, but I still hear it as a back office or, support staff. And I resist that, and have resisted that narrative for the last 10 years, because I, one, don't think that roles like that really speak to the realities of what the possibilities of these roles are. For some organizations, yes, perhaps that is the case. But I think if you're talking from the perspective of the top 30 or 40 funders in the world, maybe even the top 50, that is not what these roles have been, even if that is still the belief that many who still even occupy these roles think, because that has been the narrative for so long. So when I approach the work as, you are a strategic voice and thought partner with, not for, other departments, including programs, which it can often feel like foundations are created for and benefit program teams the most, I think it is a sort of self-determination to be able to step into that narrative and leadership, style to say, yes, but I also belong in the space and can think through and speak on and activate on, the very issues that we fund. I might not be the decision maker on what gets funded, but how it gets funded equally matters, both for you, my colleague and peer, as well as for the organization overall. And I think the lens that grants professionals see is an organizational lens. That is an immediate strategy paradigm. When you get to see not just what a particular team is doing, but you get to see how money flows and capital moves across the organization, across different grantees, what's being funded, what's not being funded, how it's going about the various geographies and strategies. And to not lend a voice to that is to me the biggest missed opportunity on the grant side, that I think this subsector inside of philanthropy is just catching up to. But I'm also mindful that, having been in it the majority of my time over the last 10 years, that it really is the side of philanthropy that is most compliant, using that word intentionally, to rules, regulations, safety, security, and some of the things that are not necessarily aligned with rocking the boat or thinking outside of the box, coloring outside of the lines. I'm very mindful of that too. And people have to show up where they are on their various journeys with that. To me, I think I showed up from the jump with that sort of mindset. So, and it's something that those other things that I just named, the characteristics and values that I listed, are things that I don't adhere to and don't plan to. And I also realize you don't have to, and still be able to do this work and flow with the rest of your peers and colleagues in the organization. That's what my day-to-day looks like. And that's what I plan for that to continue to look like. I don't think that, coloring inside the lines, sometimes sure, but other times no. And, and I think for, my day-to-day, I get to manage, again, 3 incredible people. At one time, it was 4 in my role, having historically covered data, grants management, and knowledge management is unique in that respect, because it allows me to think spatially, again, not just organizationally, but sector-wide. And also that comes with being able to do board service, whether it be peak grant making, barbershop books, or Black film space, Streetwise Partners, whatever it may be. That to me also gives that sense of spatial thinking that I can apply to my day-to-day, especially if I'm getting a question around grant making in China in the morning, and then grant making to an OFAC-related country in the afternoon. All of that requires skills related to flexibility, adaptability, influence, being able to speak multiple languages on a given day. That is part of the day-to-day as well. That requires a sense of being a generalist to the extreme. And that is part of what is fun for me. I don't like silos. So I think being able to tap into those different conversations and different outcomes, different expectations within my own team, but also across teams, to me is a leadership quotient that I really want to double down on, and something that I don't think some of the other departments really offer in that respect, to be able to think and act generally in that way. But then you have to know what to do with it. And that's what I like to encourage the next generation of folks coming up to really think and act like. But then fortune also favors prepared. Don't go into a program meeting, if you haven't read their strategy, know what their budget is, know what their priorities are. Like, don't just go in thinking that you can talk their game without knowing what it is and knowing what they care about. So fortune does certainly favor the prepared. So be prepared, but also show up like you belong, and then act like it too. That is a skill in and of itself in a sector that, to me, sometimes can be a bit insecure, but not by choice. I think some of it is just the culture and how philanthropy and some foundations have treated grants management, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so that has been largely my leadership style.
That's great. And I could definitely see that, right? I feel like my understanding of at least the folks that I've met in grants management is definitely some of that generalist kind of approach, but also like the safeguarders of what's happening throughout the organization, right? Like the folks that are seeing across, understanding, as you all said, the trends, the values, the equities, the inequities, what's happening, and then being able to speak to that both on an organizational and then on a sectors level, right? Like there's so much value in that. And you all in grants management have to be pretty good at whatever the program areas are and understand it enough to have some of those conversations, right? Versus I was more on the program side. Like I just basically have to be good at the thing that I'm doing, right? But you all have to be good at the thing that I'm doing, the thing that the other program team is doing, and be able to show up in all the different spaces and make sure that everyone feels like you are in partnership with them and understand what they do enough to have a real conversation around it. So,
and let me also add, because Fauzi said something that stuck with me around listening. Is a word that he used in his answer. And I would also say part of the leadership, regardless of title, because I know Satanya Fair, the president of Peak Grant Making, talks about being title agnostic often. And I think that there's a high level of truth to that too, depending on, again, your belief in how you show up in your respective organization and role. And to me, I think it is also learning how to lead with questions when you don't have the answer per se to a given problem. But, my default is not to tell any program team or colleague internally, no, that's not, what I was used to in government. And that was certainly not what I was used to for especially the first 6 years of my career, which was largely working with Silicon Valley funders, which I thought would be the theme throughout my career because I didn't seem to be able to get jobs with any other types of organizations or funders except those working from the Silicon Valley. And that had its pros and cons. But one of the pros, I think, was learning this is a cohort of people that don't like to hear no, who don't live in the realm of possibility of no. It's always about, how do I end up getting ultimately what I want? And figuring out creative ways to do that. And that has not left me. And I think it's never really a no. It's always, all right, let's figure this out. Let's see how we can get there. Can you answer X that leads to Y? That'll get us to Z. If it doesn't get us to Z, let's go back to B and figure out how we got there from the jump. To me, that is the network weaving of leading with questions, and sort of that epistemic community that you're creating with colleagues internally to ultimately get to what is it that they want to accomplish. We talk a lot about impact in this space, right? Which has its own pros and cons of, what is our impact? I don't particularly like that question so much, especially from a foundation, but, if anything can be measured, you can have impact. But I think what most people are really asking is what is our point of interest, especially as a funder, because, ultimately we aren't the ones having impact. It's those, creating impact in the world. And we're trying to figure out how their impact and our interests merge. I think that's what we're really getting to. And the GM seat can help get you closer to that answer, especially if you're a social science funder like my organization. You're never going to get to exact, so there's always questions to be asked. And, you're at that point of there's always a somewhat more or less gap between what that impact looks like. That's the point of opportunity for more questions, where that impact and interest merge. So I think the more that we do that, the more credibility that you gain inside of these organizations where knowledge is seen as valuable, and your ability to generate it.
Can you all tell us what is your favorite part of your role and the most challenging part of your roles?
Yeah, for me, it's pretty easy. I would say my favorite part is being able to get out into community, right? Being able to kind of see programming happen and see the potential of what grant funds can do for those communities. Because a lot of times we are sitting in these silos and we're behind a desk and behind a computer screen, and we know the funds are going out the door, but not everyone is privileged enough to be able to see the programming happen or see where it started and kind of where it's going and the potential it can have. And so I would say that that's my favorite part. And on the flip side of the coin, when we are in our kind of process of deciding who we are going to fund and who we are going to support, the no's are tough, man. Like saying no to an organization that has a really strong program and honestly deserves the funding, but there just aren't unlimited funds. That's one of the hardest parts of my job, I would say. And then just being able to be honest, I think that that's the other part of what I do best, is just being fully open to sharing the hard details and making sure that I'm not wasting their time, right? Because I have been on the other side of the coin. I have been a part of development teams and creating grant applications, and it's just a waste of time when the funder strings you along, right? And they say, oh, there may be an opportunity next year. Oh, there may be an opportunity for the next cycle, right? I'd rather be fully transparent and honest and say, right now, there just isn't a fit. I don't see alignment. Here may be other resources that you could tap into. I'd be happy to make an introduction, right? So I'd say that it's really those two things. Right now, I'm in the middle of that process. So we are going through our applications, and I'm getting ready to say no to the first batch. And it is something that I think about leading into it and how I can be available for them if they have any questions. So, but I like to lead and think and lean into the good parts, right? Because when you're able to share the trustees' visions and be able to kind of help facilitate the use of these grant funds and being able to see how impactful a Sprinter van might be for a program that's serving inner city youth that just want to play soccer, but they just don't have reliable transportation. Like that's a win in my book. And that's what keeps me coming back every single day. So that's what I lean into.
That's great. Actually, before Roland jumps in there, can I also ask you, because I appreciate all that you said there. And one of the things you mentioned was just your favorite part still being able to see the work and the end result. Wondering if you could speak a little bit about that transition coming from direct services to the foundation side, because I've always seen philanthropy as one of the challenges can be that you're kind of that step removed. So you don't get to always see and have the direct connection with the folks as you did in your previous role.
Yeah, so that honestly, that was my deal breaker. If I wasn't going to be able to be out in community, I wasn't going to take the role. So for me, like people are rooted and they're the center of everything I do professionally and personally. And that's kind of what has gotten me to this point. I can think back to just even where I was born, right? Like I was born in Africa and moved here to America by the grace of my mother being able to say, I am going to sacrifice my first son and say, here's an opportunity for you to have a better life. So for me, it's all about paying it forward because I understand what my mother did for me. And it's not just my mother, it's my stepmother. She's done the same thing. It's my cousin. She's done the same thing. So for me, women have been super impactful in kind of where I am today. And they all taught me how to pay it forward. So I never wanted to lose that. So for those of you that are kind of in the nonprofit space and are thinking about making that transition, if that is at the core of who you are, don't sacrifice that because you will be miserable. Like you will just not enjoy the work because you aren't doing what you love to do. And if being around community and being in community is kind of what keeps you coming back and what is your North Star, don't sacrifice that for any amount of dollars and money and opportunities because, yes, you may be able to make more money in philanthropy, but you will be miserable if you're not rooted in your beliefs. And I think that that's kind of what drives me and what keeps me kind of coming back every single day and every year.
That's a hard answer to follow, but it's my answer is the same. You know, what is the most challenging, and I think the biggest opportunity is managing people. It's a tough job, and it's the most fulfilling part of my career to date, really. And I think it has taught me so many things that we don't even have time to unpack on this call today. But I think it's something about watching people become unafraid and more familiar with their own dopeness, you know, and just tapping into. I don't manage from deficits. I have no interest in that. I don't care so much about focusing on people's deficits. I like to be aware of them. I like to coach through them as necessary. But I also have learned, you know, just in my time in my current role, that I really want to focus on people's gifts and the ones that they know about and the ones that they don't and the ones that they're most afraid of. And that is a process, you know, and you have to also align. I say you don't have to do anything, but I have chosen my leadership style to be more adaptable to people's long-term interests. Not everybody wants to be a director. Not everybody wants to be a president of one of these organizations, you know, whether for a living donor, an endowment, or advisory firm, or whatever it may be. You learn that as you go. Some people are happy growing in place, and that is totally fine. And you have to support them as well and, you know, help them on their journey to grow in place. Not everybody wants a promotion. Some people just want the raise, and that's okay too. Support them in that. And that does not have to be at the sacrifice of growth and other opportunities that come along with that too. I'm like, get to know your people. And I think, you know, the intentionality required to be a people manager and director of the team has also taught me you have to be very deliberate to be a bad boss. Because I think a lot about my people. I think a lot about my team. I cross Park Avenue or, you know, certain visits to the office. And I'm like, you know, I wonder if we're covering this, or I wonder if we are doing that, or I wonder how, you know, one of my managers is thinking about this, so I should support them on that. I should put them on to whatever program that is, or whatever it may be. I think a lot about my team and, you know, and also how to support them and also helping them navigate challenges that they own that then become my challenges because they picked up on it, or something that now has become either a stumbling block or hurdle to their progress or challenge internally or externally. You also, as the team leader, have to figure that out and help them navigate through that and still keep the culture intact. And so that is the job. Managing people and directing a team is the job. And it is a 24-hour day job because, you know, sometimes your people might get sick and it's a text message at 9 o'clock or 6 a.m. or whatever it may be. And you still have to be on and show up for them as if you were equally as interested as if they're coming to you with a project budget that has some questions from a grantee that put all types of things in there that you have no idea what they're doing. That happens too. So it is the ultimate test of flexibility, not a flex. And It also means that there are times when I need to take, a back seat or passenger seat role and let somebody else drive on something, let them get some shine and some star power, let them get used to being in front of a room or leading a training or teaching and cultivating that as a skill too, because leadership, again, is not just about the title. It really does come to experience. And some bosses don't want to give that up. But since this question is about, Fauzi and I'll keep it about me, is I have learned to enjoy giving some of that up. And saying, no, you lead this and take this on. I'll be here to support you, coach you, direct you, but I'll be taking a behind the scenes role. We can meet right in this office that I'm sitting in and just keep it moving. But for the most part, that has been, the greatest joy and the greatest challenge of this role, but also I would say career wise, at least in philanthropy to date.
As you all continue to grow in your leadership in the field, can you all share any resources, fellowships, books, podcasts, things that have helped you all continue to grow in this space?
So for me, I would say that I don't have any resources as it pertains to philanthropy, but I do have kind of best practices that I've used for myself to get myself to where I wanted to be at. So when I was working in the hospitality sector, I knew that I didn't want to be there forever. And I was intentional about how I was networking. I knew that if I wanted a career or a job in a specific space that was going to enable me to be able to afford to live in Greater Boston, and if you want to look up how much it is to live in Greater Boston, you'll understand why. I think that I had to be strategic about who I was networking with. So one thing that I did was I picked up a golf stick or a club and I went to the driving range. And the reason I did that was because I knew there would be individuals there that would see me as like, oh, wow, what is this Black guy doing at the driving range first? But two, they would see that I was actually good at golf. And three, they'd want to learn more about me. And it's really funny because almost every job, or except for this one, almost every job that I've gotten has been facilitated at a driving range. I don't know why, but that's where I've networked the best. So figuring out how you can network, what it is that you want to accomplish in that individual call or conversation with that person. And a lot of times it's not approaching it from a lens of what can you do for me? But again, what I said before is listening, right? Listening to that individual, their story, how they got to where they are, what their skill sets are, what did they have to develop, what were their challenges along the way. And a lot of times people are going to talk about their families, right? And being mindful and intentional about listening. And when you circle back, lead with family or lead with their passions. That's been invaluable. It's something that is a skill set for me, and I just do it authentically. But in anything that I do, it's always through networking and seeing how I can help others, or again, just listen to what they got going on. But as it relates to resources, I think one thing that I've started to develop and think about is being mindful and intentional about how I see myself in the world and in the space of the professional setting. One thing that I've started to do is create mind movies. I don't know if you're familiar with what mind movies are, but it is, in a sense, a way for you to project and create the life or the career or the space that you wish to live in. So you can do it for your personal, you can do it professionally. What I've decided to do is professionally create a mind movie of what type of role I want, where do I want that job to be, how much do I want to make, what is the impact that I want to have, what types of people am I working with. And it's a literal movie that you watch every single day before you start your job or you start work. And it's just being intentional about seeing it and repetitively seeing it. So then it's almost like you're living it already, right? So you're not surprised when that door opens up and you're prepared. That's the biggest thing for me, because again, I think philanthropy or the professional setting, it's just about how you relate to people. And if you learn, a lot of jobs will just teach you the skill sets along the way. But you got to be a good person. You got to be kind of a team player and being willing to listen. And if you don't have those kind of soft skills, again, as I referred to before, like nobody's going to want to work with you or work for you. So developing those and understanding those early on is super important.
Yeah, I'm currently rereading this book called Quiet by Susan Cain. There are a number of people that don't believe that I'm actually an introvert because I spend a lot of time with and around people, but I generate, and I see that laughter, Radhy. It's true. I'm very much an introvert, and I generate most of I think, my best thoughts and thinking alone, or, walking the dog, or, in those moments, or being by the water, and not necessarily from large collaborations or summits or whatnot. I enjoy that too, but I realize that I am my best self in those other spaces, or send me outside of London in like the English countryside or something, like with a Tolkien book. I mean, that sounds like a dream world to me. But I say that to say Quiet is one of those books that is about leadership, especially given that the majority of executives and people that tend to get the promotions and whatnot tend to be extroverts. And, so what does it look like when you are more of an introverted leader to get the same type of opportunities, and, thinking about that from a professional perspective, but also as a senior leader in an organization that, ultimately aspires to be an executive in an organization. So that I am rereading that, but also thinking about something that Fauzi said in terms of the core meaning of this call about mentorship. I think about one of my former mentors, and I say former because she passed away during the height of the pandemic. I think about Anita Estelle from Washington, D.C., one of the first Black women to have a lobbying firm in D.C. And I think about our last conversation that we had at the Salt Line right there in Navy Yard in Southeast D.C. That was right between my move between DC and New York. And she said, one thing that I want you to remember, to what Fauzi even said earlier about, what women, specifically Black women, have done for brothers like ourselves. She's like, I really don't want you to ever forget what Black women have done for you, whether it be me, whether it be your mother, your grandmothers, whatever that may be. But I also want you to take more risks, to jump into the 8-foot end of the pool, to not regret having failed for your lack of success in trying. And, we wrote out a number of examples, and she even brought in a brother from Capitol Hill that it was so interesting. She's like, I want you to see that I could get you the job that you want on Capitol Hill, and I also don't want you to take it. I just want you to see how to do it. I want you to see how I went about it and leverage those skills for when you need to be utilitarian and have relationships that are just about you do for me, I do for you. There's nothing wrong with that. You have some more genuine relationships that are built on utilitarianism, but also you really want to get to know that person beyond just what they can do for you and for what you can do for them. Have those people too. And then also make sure that you know your tribe. Make sure you know the people that are your day ones, your day twos, your day threes. Keep them close. Cultivate those relationships intentionally, deliberately. Invest in those people. Answer their emails, take their calls, and do it quickly. Show the sense of urgency that you care about them because of who they are contacting you. Talk to anybody and everybody, but really give the special attention to those who are in your day 1, 2s, and 3s. And I have not forgotten that. And I watched her do that time and time again, even when she let me get some experience in her lobby shop and see how those relationships work. And so for me, among the myriad of mentors that I've had, whether it be Marcus McGrew and Steve Casey on this side of the house in philanthropy, shout out to Satanya Fair and Susan Harrison as well in that conversation, or some of those in government, some of those in corporate, academia as well. You need a mosaic of mentors to really get a shape of what it is that not only you want to do in work, in profession, but also life. And knowing that you get a choice in what mentors tell you. You don't have to do anything that they offer you, which is why I think it's even stronger and more powerful when you know why you want to use that person's time, and when you are deliberate and intentional about approaching them for what they have to offer you, and then what you can give back to them. It is a give and take with the ultimate purpose of getting something mutual out of that relationship for the betterment of you both. And then knowing that they also have experience, whether that be professional or just life experience generally, to offer you, so that perhaps you don't make some of the same mistakes, or maybe you do, and you learn how to do something a little bit differently. So I think about Anita, I think about the other people I name, I think about where I am now, and I think about the gratefulness and thankfulness that I hold as the two values I'm holding this year in the mix of everything else going on in the world, that these roles that we're in, that Fauzi and I are in, that it's a privilege space. And if I'm thinking about the words of Kenneth Jones, the executive vice president and COO at the MacArthur Foundation, when he spoke in 2021 at the event down at the Blacksonian down in DC, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, he said, one thing that we have to remember as Black people in the space is that we are the privileged oppressed. And part of being the privileged oppressed is that we get to do incredible work like this. We get to give money away or help give money away. We get to move the most flexible capital in the world. What is there to complain about? But on the other side of that is there are still a number of reminders that we don't belong, that there are reminders that we have to generate our own sense of belonging, that we are not DEI hires, that we are not, scapegoats for some broader picture of diversity that doesn't actually exist in reality. And that is the bigger challenge when I'm talking with a brother like Fauzi or others that are coming up in the space or have been in the space for as long as I have. That is the differential where it's like, oh no, we belong. And here's why. And we're going to lift each other up to remind each other that we belong in the space. That goes well beyond mentoring. That goes beyond sponsorship. That is self-determination and philanthropy, where the majority of people who do the work and who are decision makers don't necessarily look like us, but can. And even in that, there's some other unique challenges that come with that, but also opportunities. And we'll focus on both. And so I'll leave that at that.
Yeah. And, and Roland, you reminded us earlier about stepping into your own dopeness and understanding kind of who you are and what you bring to the table. And the fact that like I say this very humbly, but also like, I'm really ill at my job. Like I know what I'm doing. So like respectfully. Right. So like there's no way that I'll be in a room with some folks and they'll look at my hire a little different because I'm really good at what I do. I say that because as you spoke, it just is a good reminder, like, no, we bring a ton to this table and like it'll be really challenging for you to convince me otherwise. Yeah, Fauzi, you mentioned earlier being thoughtful about stepping into philanthropy also as you were thinking about cost of living and the difference in salaries that you can get in philanthropy versus sometimes in direct service work, right?
Yeah.
Would love for both of you to speak a little bit about your experience with kind of what that salary differentiation is between government or direct services. And also if you all have thoughts on resources that people can go check salary comparisons as they're thinking about getting into philanthropy.
Yeah, so it's general knowledge that the nonprofit sector will, in a sense, pay maybe 40% less than philanthropy, right? So if I just speak to my previous experiences, I had the opportunity to be a program manager, and that salary was, again, this is dating back to maybe 2020, a little bit before then. That salary was about $50,000, right? Compared to if I were in that position on the philanthropic side, it might be 3 times as much as that, depending on the foundation, depending on the geographic area, depending on the scope of work. So again, yes, you may be able to make more money in philanthropy or on this side of the coin, but I do want to urge folks to find the right fit. And there are people out there that will kind of give you the honest assessment of what that right fit may be for you. And then if you find yourself in the space and you realize that it's not the right fit, you just have to find your network and, like Roland said, find your tribe and find your tribe early on, right? Because when something isn't going right, those are the people that you're going to lean on to stay in this space. And I'm only speaking to kind of people of color and Black men because that's who I am. We need more of us in this space. And we need more of us to kind of champion the next generation and the next cohort of Black men and Black women in this space. So as people kind of get discouraged maybe about what it is that they're doing on a day-to-day or kind of the environment they're in, I urge them to find their people, find their tribe, and don't give up because you are super important. And we do need more of us in this space. So right now I'm in the programmatic side and grants management side. historically speaking, grants managers or grants management side of the work may get paid a little bit less than the programmatic side. Again, as I shared, depends on the foundation, depends on the scope of work, but you can make close to, if not more than, a comfortable salary to live kind of where I'm at in Greater Boston. So that scope is, if you're single, don't have any kids, and don't have any debt, it might be anywhere from 75,000 entry, or I'd say maybe 65,000 entry, upwards to maybe 85, 90 if you have experience just starting out into this sector. So, and then it can go all the way up. So the one thing I do want to share is Candid is a great resource for just looking at data collection. And also, I would say, if you're looking at 990s, you can see who the top salaries are for an organization, right? So if you have a dream of working for X foundation down the line and you're trying to figure out what that pathway is to that and what that salary is, a lot of times you'll be able to see the top 5 earners for that foundation or for that organization. So that's something that I did when I first started out, to just kind of get an understanding of, am I being underpaid, or is this kind of just where the growth process is? So I don't know if, Roland, you have any other resources. I believe Peak also has a report out in regards to grants management salaries, and they kind of do a deeper dive into geographic location, how long a person has been at an organization, and also demographic information. So yeah, I would say Peak is a great resource as well.
Yeah, I think the 2 resources that Fauzi named are perfect. I think the only other 2 I can think of are Council on Nonprofits and Council on Foundations also do salary surveys. I think, so if I got that wrong, the audience will correct me on that, but I'm pretty sure that they do. And I would also say, that you get what you negotiate, and knowing your worth is equally as important, and knowing what the salary bands are, because they range across geographies. What you get paid in New York, DC, and the Bay is very different than what you get in even Dallas, Houston, and Chicago. So to Fauzi's point, it does help to know the landscape and to see the differences across geographies, because for some reason there are a number of companies and foundations that will pay you differently based on where you live, as if that's evidence-based practice or whatever it's called. But I don't necessarily prescribe to that if I were in the decision-making seat of that. But regardless, there are companies that do that. Know how to negotiate. Know what you bring to the table. Radhy, to your earlier point, you know what you bring to the table, and you know your worth. That is something that I think all 3 of us, in addition to those listening, it's important to remember that.
Agree. And outside of my first job ever, I have never since taken a job without negotiating something.
Absolutely.
Whether that was title or salary or both. So definitely echo that. You get what you negotiate. By the time you get to negotiating, they already want you. So you might as well make it make sense for everyone involved.
Facts.
And it's funny that you say that, because for me, it was similar on the nonprofit side. But when I came over to philanthropy, that was not how I approached it. I was very green to what I could ask for, or kind of what I should ask for. And I think that I've learned that. And again, you don't have everything figured out when you first get started in any space. So again, what I said before, give yourself grace, but learn from your mistakes. And that's why mentorship and coaches and leaders that may pour back into you are so important, right? Because they're gonna teach you that before you get started, and you can have that conversation before you get to that point when you're signing on the dotted line. So
that's real. Is there anything else we haven't discussed that the world should know about you two?
I mean,
we're both musicians or have a passion
yeah,
for music. I think
that's a good one.
So Roland did say he's an introvert. I would say I also am an introvert, but I think it's a skill set to learn how to get into a room and say, all right, even though this is uncomfortable, I know I have to do this, and I may have to perform a solo. And I kind of think back to my experiences growing up when I was playing saxophone. And for me personally, I was terrified at times, but then you get up there and you get to play a solo and it's just you, and the kind of world goes dark and you're just there jamming, right? So music, I love music. We were just recently in New Orleans, so I got to sneak away, and Roland gave me some great recommendations. So that's a passion of mine. Instrumental choice is the saxophone, preferably the alto. I don't know if I have the lungs for the tenor or baritone yet, but yeah, that's one thing that we both share in common.
Yeah, and I'm a pianist and keyboardist, so it's I think for me, music, the leadership lesson that I learned most, and I played for 30 years of my life, and my grandmother was a gospel organist, so she was the impetus for all of that. But my father was the one that thought I should also be trained classically, so kudos to him too. But I think the top leadership lesson that I've learned from music is how to listen to many different voices at the same time and not get overwhelmed by it. And specifically having played in bands, that brings on many different types of personalities, many different things happening at one time to get everything to make sense. What the drummer is doing is very different from the bass player, from the keyboardist to, the saxophonist. If you have a John Legend style band, you're going to have all of that and more, and still be the piano player of your own if you're John Legend. So I say that to say that it is not as overwhelming to sit in a room and listen to either the clanging cymbals, taking up airtime in a meeting, or those that are making more sense, like a bass guitarist. So and it's a valuable skill. And I play and practice every day. That's my safe space and my escape. Again, when I'm not walking on the river, music is truly not just listening to it, but also playing it. I can't imagine life without that.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing that. Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate all of the career cheat codes you got to share with the audience. Some more intel about your path and how you got into the roles that you're in now, and look forward to continuing to see your growth in the field.
Thank you too, Radhy.
Thank you, Radhy. Thank you for the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did and believe on the mission we're on, please like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're using, and share this podcast with your friends and your networks. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Career Cheat Code, and tell us people or careers you would like to see highlighted. See you next week with some more cheat codes. Peace.